So I was physically capable enough for my needs. Like I'm not going to be a pro athlete or anything, but I could do what I wanted to do. I didn't feel limited anyway. Then I go find out I have cancer. So the day before that, was I healthy? And the day after I found that out, was I unhealthy?
Bringing you a reasoned approach to health and fitness. This is the Phi Life Podcast.
Welcome to the Phi Life Podcast. I'm John Barber, and with me is Brad Pilon. And today we're brought to you by the Total T Clinic. And we're going to try to define health and or the word healthy. And I think we're already know we're going to arrive at it's impossible to define, but we're going to try to work our way through this and give you a way to think about that word as it pertains to yourself. And when you ever hear anyone else say it too.
It sucks. It's a whole, dude, I've been trying to do this for like a decade, and I have yet to come up with some sort of definition that actually even kind of works. It's really frustrating because you and I work in the health industry or close or satellite to the health industry, and no clue what the word means. So we can take a stab at it, but it's frustrating to really kind of dig into.
Yeah, and you can look it up. I was Google searching this earlier, and you get all kinds of ridiculous definitions going back to an old one from the World Health Organization, something about being in a state of physical, mental, and emotional well-being. And I'm like, well, no one's ever like that.
All at the same time? Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe if you were high on a really powerful drug, you could say that you feel like that all at once.
7-year-olds are healthy and everybody else can just screw off, right? Like
really.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's absurd. It can't just be in a perfect state of bliss in all phases, mental, emotional, and physical. Nobody's like that at any moment.
It can't just be, this is the one that I was really trying to toy with the just health is the absence of disease. And then I started thinking about like high level professional athletes with type 1 diabetes. I'm like, well, so I have to say they're not healthy, but even though they're managing their diabetes, that doesn't seem right. Because then I'm like, oh, I know that you're a peak human specimen who's going to live a full life. You're lean, you're healthy, you're 1% of 1% in terms of your athletic ability, but you're not healthy. In fact, does that mean that since I don't have diabetes, I'm healthier than It doesn't. That doesn't work. So the absence of disease, we have to scratch that one off because that doesn't mean healthy either. So it can't be something unmeasurable like your well-being across your spiritual, physical, mental. It can't be that. It can't be the absence of disease. What is it then?
Yeah, and on the absence of disease note, that's assuming we can detect diseases. Like if you go far enough back, medicine couldn't tell certain things were there.
Well, forget far enough back, a year and a half ago, when you went in for your scan, did you feel sick?
No, that's a good point. So
you had a tumor, a cancerous tumor growing in your body, right? So
right.
Yeah.
So okay, that's a good example. So let's work on that one.
Yeah.
So I felt fine. I could do whatever it is that I would like to do on a daily basis. I could,
at the time you could have trained up to run a 5K or whatever the mile, you could train, you could play sports, right?
Yeah. I didn't perceive myself as being limited physically, emotionally, mentally, whatever. I could kind of get through a day, and I was pretty happy with how I got through a day. I could, I golf a lot so that nothing was limiting there. I could do whatever kind of exercise I wanted to do in the gym. So I was physically capable enough for my needs. Like I'm not going to be a pro athlete or anything, but I could do what I wanted to do. I didn't feel limited anyway. Then I go find out I have cancer. So the day before that, was I healthy? And the day after I found that out, was I unhealthy?
Yeah.
And then let's expand that. A year later, I get my lower left lung lobe removed, which successfully removes all the cancer, but now I'm down half a lung. So am I healthy? Like, am I, by the way, it never felt different. Like surgery, after surgery, my life feels the same,
Yeah.
but somewhere along the line, somebody would define different states of health there.
Well, I mean, think about when when in your recovery, we had to walk all the time, and you were up in Canada. So we walked malls because it was too bloody cold to walk outside. And you were a week or two post-op, and you were moving better than some of the other mall walkers. So does that make them really unhealthy? Like, I don't
Mhm.
know how we do this, right? But I know that it's a billion-dollar word, so it must be definable. Otherwise, what's the healthcare system?
Mhm. Well, and here, I'll add another complication to that. Post surgery, during surgery, it's possible, it's not likely, it's not common, but sometimes you end up injuring the nerve that innervates one of your vocal cords, and that happened to me. So I was mute. I couldn't speak for about 4 months. So post surgery, when we're walking, I can't talk. So I'm okay. So we've removed the cancer. I'm down half a lobe, but now I'm cancer free.
But you're only communicating via text and snapping at me.
I'm
Yes.
communicating via text and like hand gestures and stuff.
Right.
And now I can't talk, and I have a paralyzed vocal cord that may or may not heal. So am I healthy?
Cancer free, but quieter. Yeah.
So it's like
Yeah.
trade-offs. This is all about trade-offs. So I've traded, and I would say, well, I would text and send it to people. I would say I'd probably trade a vocal cord for no cancer, which at the time, that was the life I was living.
I would say by the end of that vocal cord, I don't know if you were getting pretty frustrated, man.
Oh, it's hell. It's hell. If you ever, I mean, anyone listening who's had this, who's lost their voice for any length of time, it's the worst. Because you just get left out of social situations. You can't keep up. I remember we were out I don't know, we were watching a game at the bar. There's like 4 of us there, and everyone else was talking, commenting on things that were happening in the game. But all I could do was text and then press play, and it would speak my text. But by the time I thumbed out like something about whatever everyone was saying, they had long since moved on to the next point in the conversation. So I was just like, it's going to be dumb if I press play now, because they're like, what is he talking about?
You also text like an 80-year-old. So.
Yeah. So it was like, oh, you totally just get excluded from life when you can't keep up. Right. So it's funny. Some people thought I was deaf. So like people at coffee shops and restaurants, they started doing sign language. And I'm thinking to myself, no, I can hear you. I just can't speak.
Yeah. And I don't know how to sign. So.
Yeah. And I can't sign back. Like, I'm like, this really sucks. Like, we're really at a stalemate here. So I would have to type, or whoever I was with would kind of, be like, oh, no, he can hear you. He just can't talk.
Oh, I would have played along with that.
Yeah. And they're like, oh, okay. Yeah. You imagine if I came up with my own set of signs. So a couple people signed to me, and I'm like, oh, what do I do here? So I had to type out, like when no one was with me, I'd have to type out like, no, I can hear you. I just can't talk. And then I'd have to play the message for them. Anyways, the point is, in that case, I would imagine most people would trade no cancer for a lack of a functioning vocal cord. And as far as how badly it affected my life, the vocal cord was 1,000 times more disruptive than when I had cancer. Couldn't feel it, never had a symptom, got it removed, never felt it. But the thing that completely wrecked my life for 4 months was being mute. That was terrible.
But then people who actually can't hear and do have to use sign language, are we saying they're not healthy? No. So it's not even that, right? Like it's, but then I guess you could make the argument that if, to go back to our diabetes example, they are dependent on our healthcare system. Does that make them unhealthy? It's frustrating, right? Because we want a clear term of what this means. We want to be able to say what the health industry means. Because if we have that, then we can have an open dialogue of what eating healthy means. But how do we have online arguments on Twitter to end in death threats over what isn't healthy eating? We can't define healthy, and it's infuriating. It's crazy.
Yeah. So I guess various organizations define it one way or another. So like public health, modern Western countries have public health departments, and they completely take the individual out of it, and they view us all as like statistical averages, and they view it as an intervention, as a top-down intervention for the betterment of the population. But any one individual can get lost in that, and it's just not for you specifically.
If we look at it as populational health, so you can't define. It's kind of like stats, right? So we could say that health isn't something that applies to an individual; it can only apply to a group. And then we could say that no, because then I have to say, are you more or less healthy than the average of that group? But we still need to define healthy to get an average. So, how much of a burden are you on your government for healthcare? Like,
Yeah, and that reduces you to just statistics on a page. That has nothing to do with you as a person. And I guarantee when you're talking about your own health, that you're not at all thinking how you affect the rest of the country. You're talking about yourself.
no, at no point am I thinking how much do I cost my government for? Yeah,
No, not at all. So,
there's
but
no
that's
tax
how
breaks for fasting and being lean, right? Like,
right. But that's how they're thinking of it. They're
Yeah.
looking at you as like, how long on average might you live? What's the average expense that you might cost us? All of those things.
my cousin's an actuary. Like, how would an actuary define health, right? Because their whole job is just trying to figure out if you're insurable or not, basically, when you're going to die. So, yeah, but then we were just bringing in the how far are you from death as a marker of health. That's an odd one too.
Well, and then that's the other question: is the definition just how many years you make it, regardless of the state you're in for those years?
But there would be a super healthy 80-year-old who could make it to 95, so 15 years. And then there could be just what I would consider, without defining healthy, really, really unhealthy 30-year-old who has got another 30 years in them, no matter how hard they're trying to kill themselves early. So it can't
Right.
be just that, right? Yeah. So, and then the whole longevity thing, that's a whole other podcast because it's wrapping our head around that. I mean, then you'd never know what is healthy right now because you have to wait 50 years to see who died and who didn't. So, absence, so then are we philosophical? Is it absence of stress or worry about your specific disease state or body? So then in that situation, philosophically, you were healthy before your diagnosis and you were unhealthy after. We could do it that way. But then that means that someone who's completely oblivious to their situation is healthy.
Yeah. So the absence of understanding or the absence of knowledge, somehow translates into health. But
right,
and that goes to,
so a 4-year-old with cancer who can't conceptualize the cancer would be healthy. So that doesn't work.
Right. So, and then it comes down to, part of this is just the current state of medicine. Like, what can we diagnose? What can we define versus what we can't? So if you go back 100 years, the standard of what is to be expected was based on the state of medicine at that time. Whereas now we can solve a lot more problems. Like before we discovered insulin, type 1 diabetics are in real trouble. Like there's just nothing we could do for them. Now, a type 1 diabetic can expect to live a relatively normal life span compared to everyone else because they can use insulin.
Yeah.
But before it was there, we didn't have nothing to give them. But they were just they're going to live a really short life. So it doesn't even make sense to define it like forever. It just for right now. Like what can we do right now given the medical industry right now?
What if we don't define health? Let's put a pin in that if we want to talk corporate. And okay, let's define healthy eating then. Maybe we can just avoid actually defining the word, but we can use it and move that way. So healthy eating would be eating in a way that improves your health. That doesn't do shit.
Yeah. So healthy eating, that's probably one of the most controversial or most talked about things online. And what's healthy? Is it balanced macros? Is it keto? Is it, carnivore, vegetarian? Like Brad, you've adopted vegan lifestyle for a while now, or diet. I'm an omnivore, but I don't know. I think I'm just kind of plain Jane. Nothing special about how I eat. So
Yeah.
is your way of eating healthier than mine? Like,
And
what about
if I were going to be, if I'm going to be a zealot about it, right? I would argue markers. So I would say, well, my cholesterol is really good, or my insulin sensitivity is fantastic, and that kind of stuff. But then the problem with markers is there's how many do we have? Like hundreds, probably not thousands, but definitely hundreds, right? So we could get down there, okay, testosterone levels, or my VO2 max, right? Like so interesting, because there is science behind those markers. They're markers for a reason, right? So is health just a selective choice of certain markers that matter to you, and then making sure they're optimal? And then we have to define optimal. But like, is that a step in the right direction?
Well, and you said it, it's like what matters to you. So we throw around health in other episodes. Obviously we're throwing that word around a lot. It's part of the point of the show. So I guess
it's actually in the title.
Yeah. So we might as well define what we mean. So I'll take a shot at it for me, and then you can take a shot at it for you. Also, Brad and I talk about health, or what's healthy, in reference to each other, because we've been at this long enough and we've been doing in business together long enough that I think we kind of know what their own person, like I know kind of what Brad's definition of health is for himself, and he knows for me. So it's not like we're speaking out of turn for each other, but we could be speaking out of turn for someone listening. So so for me, it's the idea of getting as many functional years and satisfying years out of my life as possible for what my, I guess, genetic predetermined number of years this body could make it. I'm trying to make it as far as it'll go in the most functional way possible, so I can enjoy and be satisfied with as many of those years as possible. I don't know if that's a little wordy, but that's about the best I can come up with.
Yeah. So you view being healthy as whenever your body is not limiting the ability to have an awesome life. So as long as your body is not getting in the way, it's usually something else like finance or something like that. But as long as it's not your body prohibiting you from doing the things you want to do, whether it's traveling or running a marathon or just being able to golf or walk up and down the stairs, then that's healthy. Something along those lines.
Yeah. And I mean so you aren't separate of your body. Mm-hmm. So that sort of incorporates mental and emotional health. It includes all of how you interact with people in your environment, like all of that stuff, like how you cope with your environment. All of that's in there, because there is no coping with your environment without your body. Like when you're there in you're not coping with your environment with your mind and spirit without your body being a part of everything.
Yeah.
So for me, it might sound, all you're thinking about is your physical state, but your physical is part of your emotional and mental. You're all one thing. So it all kind of all goes together. But yeah, it's how far can I go with this vessel and get the most out of all of that time?
Yeah. I would say that for me, I learned in the last 4 to 5 years, probably with COVID and all that I'm fairly a risk adverse person. I'm not a, big risk, big reward guy. So I like an untroubled life. And so as long as my health isn't a trouble, my body or the way it feels isn't a trouble, I'm happy. And then what I realized from there is that I do identify through my body. I mean, it's weird, but oddly, it's kind of still how I make money, right? So not being able to train is a trouble for me. So if I'm hurt myself in the gym type of thing, or I'm sick and can't work out, that it feels very unhealthy to me. So it is very personal, right? I was thinking, as a good example, what a bodybuilder would view as healthy versus an endurance athlete, let's say a marathon runner. The look would be different for each of them. The markers would be different for each of them. The feel would be different for each of them. A bodybuilder who suddenly looked like a marathon runner would probably think of him or herself as unhealthy, and vice versa. So it is a highly personal word, which is why I think we can't also really say anything about being healthy or unhealthy in terms of how we eat, because it is personal and it is then personally goal driven.
Hmm. And when you hear, so you got to think about that what we just said, like it's goal driven. Even between me and Brad, it's not exactly the same. So when you read an article about what's healthy, like, oh, you should eat 13 almonds because it reduces some kind of a risk. Um, that's not it. So
Well, you need to know if that's a risk you need reduced too, right? Like, so, um, like I get caught up a lot of times in all the uh, testosterone stuff, and then these diets increase your testosterone, or these workouts increase your testosterone, and then every once in a while I'm like, wait, every time I get it measured, mine's abnormally high. So why would I worry ever about making it higher, right? Or these things are great for reducing your HOMA-IR, a measure of insulin resistance. But then if it's not high, what's why are you trying to lower it, right? Or why is that a concern? So the markers have to be hand selected for. Well, you really do need personalized healthcare. The more we kind of go through this, health is so personal, and then identifying which markers matter to you is also so personal that I don't understand how you can ever make blanket other than what we're talking about, which is like you just have to feel good in your body. I don't know how you make blanket statements. I'd hate to be in populational healthcare. That would be tough.
Yeah, I think I think some of the assumptions come from, I guess, epidemiological or population-based research as to what seems to be average and working towards, for example, just the average lifespan in a given country, because it's not the same country to country. So what's the given lifespan? And is that the standard for population level health, which then is where recommendations and normalized ranges come in? So almost any blood marker you can think of has a normalized range. And this is even different, I think, from lab to lab or from country to country where.
Oh, that's the other problem. Yeah, if you get your blood done at two different labs, yeah, that matters too.
Yeah, they can measure it in different units. They can potentially give you different ranges as to what's normal or not. So
Yeah.
you can seem as though you're in the normal range or the optimal range from one lab, and then the next lab you're like, oh, wait a minute, I seem to be out of range on this one, and that can also change over time. So if nothing in your body changes, but those normalized standard ranges change, all of a sudden you went from healthy to unhealthy. Nothing changed in you. It's just the reference range, the reference model changed. So
Yeah.
it just goes on, and it's all comparative stuff at the population level and at the epidemiological level. It's all comparative to some sort of mythical average that doesn't exist, and some sort of average lifespan that no single one person's going to land right on.
Yeah, for population, I like so weird tangent, but I ended up writing like the outline of a book on a height, right? Because for the hockey team, it was all any parent. These boys at the time were all like 14, so at an age where the kid could be 5 foot or 6'1", right? So a lot of concern about height. So I started looking into it, and one marker that's not really useful on an individual, but one marker I really liked was if the height of the children of a population from generation to generation is increasing, you can say that that population is generally healthy, is moving towards better health. But I mean, think about what kind of marker that is. You're literally comparing 10, 20-year range gaps of children coming through a system, right? So it's not a really good way to pick up any changes. You'd be 20 years too late. And you're like, oh, these kids are shorter, right? So
Yeah.
it's not a marker you can react to from a populational healthcare point of view. It's more something you can study 80 years later and be like, oh yeah, they did really well for a while, and then that thing happened and now they don't, right? But I like that one, but you can't use that on an individual level, because the thing about height is you don't have a little wrist watch that tells you genetically you're supposed to be 5'9", but you hit 5'10", great job. Or you're supposed to be 5'9", but you hit 5'7", you might want to look at what you did as a child. So useless from an individual point of view. So yeah, to your point, you can't apply the populational stuff to an individual. It just doesn't work.
I think the best you can do is, how long could you or would you have lived if you didn't get X, Y, or Z condition that stole some of those years away from you. But how can you know that? It's not like you're born with a manual saying this unit should last 95 years, although this unit can last less years if this or this happens. Like,
Right.
that's not reasonable. But when you do population level research, that's kind of how they look at it, or at least that's kind of how it can be looked at. Is right now, given modern technology, given the way medicine works, it's reasonable people can make it to X years of life that's what's happening right now in the population. But if you don't make it, then you're the one who lost years of life from some kind of choices you made, or now you're just unhealthy.
Yeah, I like that. But then we end up kind of in a Brian Johnson blueprint situation where, for Brian and what he's doing with his whole don't die thing, we'll see efficacy in 50 years. Like he's going to have to hit 100 before we're like, oh shit, he did it. Right now, the whole looking younger thing is an admirable thing for people, but there are other people in the world who are hitting, 20, 25 years older than Brian and are just genetically young looking, right? So it can't just be looking young. Now, if he hits it to, Brian, sorry, for everybody who doesn't know, Brian Johnson is a guy who markets the blueprint, and it's this anti-aging, don't die, death is optional kind of approach to life. Really cool, great stuff to kind of read about. But for me, he'd have to hit at least 100 and be, my wife had Aunt Izzy who hit 102, and at 100 was still explaining to my wife that she could do better. So, she was still like with it and highly entertaining. So he'd have to hit 100 and still be, I don't know, squatting and bench pressing and deadlifting and doing all kinds of stuff for it to be really impressive. So I don't want to wait 50, 60 years to find out if what I was doing was healthy. So you can't really use that on an individual level either, right? Like I guess unless you're of advanced age and you're sitting there at 80 being like, yeah, but in 5 years I'll know. But for the rest of us in that kind of 50-ish range, I don't want to wait. I want to know if what I'm doing now is healthy.
Right. And so you can make some reasonable assumptions, knowing that, for example, cardiovascular disease and cancer can get people much earlier than, let's even just say, the expected age in a population.
What are the big three? Cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes? No.
Diabetes, yeah. And then,
okay.
Yeah. So, and those are, all of them are lifestyle related. Cardiovascular disease and diabetes, even like much more so. But cancer, I guess they've got 12, 13 cancers. They've linked now pretty robustly in the research to lifestyle, but specifically to even obesity. So, obviously smoking is a direct link. So you shouldn't be smoking if you care at all about reducing your risk of getting lung cancer. And then just your body composition alone is linked to certain cancers. So you can, if you care at all about not increasing your risk of getting diseases that could shorten the potential years of life you have in you, there's lifestyle things you can do. And now that's a choice. If the trade-off of what it would take, if that means modifying your diet, adding in exercise, you kind of just don't want to do. If you do smoke, quitting smoking, you're like, it's just, the misery of trying to quit smoking isn't worth it. And I'll just gamble on what it might do for shortening my life, either with heart disease or cancer. So that's your choice. I mean, no one can tell you what to do with your life. Like, all of these are just recommendations based on data that we have from research so far.
Our understanding of our interpretation of the data. That's what
Yeah. And it's always an assumption that you are likely interested in living as many years as you can possibly live and being as functional and robust, I guess.
I like robust. Good word. Yeah.
For as many of those years as possible. But there are trade-offs. There are always trade-offs along the way.
Always.
And so on the one end of the spectrum, it's straight hedonism, where you just do whatever you want, just enjoy yourself, mainline as many drugs as you want, and just I suppose just be on a high for as long as you can go until you're done. And then on the other end, you're being unbelievably restrictive, monitoring everything. Maybe somewhat the Brian Johnson model. I mean, most people don't have the money he has to even do this sort of experiment. And are you really enjoying your life when you spend every waking moment at monitoring yourself and stressing about how to make it to the next minute disease free? So I'd argue both of those cases are
That's the other thing. Yeah.
Yeah. They're both untenable.
Buying extra years so you can worry about extra years.
Yeah. So you just live in a perpetual state of worry. So that can't be the answer either. So like with all things, there's some kind of sweet spot. That's part of the theme of the podcast. There's a sweet spot in the middle where the amount of effort and the amount of sacrifices you need to make. I don't really like that word. More like the trade-offs you need to make for some delayed gratification. So maybe you don't eat a certain thing now, or you put up with the pain of a workout now for the benefit later. Some amount of this is you don't get to completely bask in the fun of a moment right now, but for the benefit of moments later and buying yourself more robust moments over time.
And I think there's a chronology to that, right? Like at 17, you can bask in the moment. At 47, 48, you can't bask in that. You know what? I like the point is like you had your chance, you had your turn, right? Like, so the stuff you got away with at 18 that maybe didn't negatively affect your health, but that probably will kill you now, is just a reminder that you had your shot at that life, that hedonistic life you were kind of talking about, right? And then the older you get, the more it matters. Yeah. Anyway.
Maybe the more attention you need to pay to it in order to give yourself the best shot at the most number of years that you can live robustly.
Okay,
I
so
like that.
We haven't
Robustly.
really defined health, which makes it interesting. But do you have, outside of getting lab work done, what would be your three markers? What would be three things that you measured for health?
All lab work? Like, you mean blood, or like even getting like MRIs?
You can't even
and all
get
that
blood
kind of
done.
stuff?
For the average person listening to the podcast who doesn't have access to, so your average person living in Ontario, Canada, who can't get any of the stuff done.
Yeah, they'll just get rejected anyways.
Yeah.
All right. I would say it's your ability to enjoy the day or be satisfied with your day. That's one of them. That sounds kind of ambiguous, but it's at the end of the day where you left like, oh God, that, like, I kind of wasted that. I was left wanting for something. And then not every day is going to be great, but on average, can you honestly say you really enjoy living that day of your life? Like, to me, that's the actual pinnacle. Like, at the end of the day, you're like, that was a good one. Like I'm glad that one's in the books. Like, that was a good one, and not regretting that, oh man, I literally wasted a day of my life.
You know what's nice about that is that you can hit that target with diabetes, cancer, lung disease, Alzheimer's. Like, it actually is a very different definition of health, but I think it might be a more important one, because some of those things you can't avoid. I don't think we know yet how to truly avoid Alzheimer's or MS or something like that, right? So that person can still be, by your definition, very healthy then.
Mm-hmm. All right. So then that's one. So that's kind of like, can you honestly say that was a day worth living? Then the next one would be more of a physical, actual, did my body allow me to do the physical things I wanted to do? So on the one end, you're literally can't get out of bed, you can't move. And on the other end, you're you have as much movement at your disposal as possible. So I could go golfing if I wanted. I could work out if I wanted. I could play some other kind of sport. I can just engage in something that takes my body there. And and I got notes here. And for my third, I guess, definition of what would be healthy in the absence of measurements would be living in a way that I can actually move towards whatever my goal happens to be at the time. So if I'm not limited in any way from moving towards a given goal. And now I'm talking about a goal that fits for that stage of
person,
life. Too.
individual. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Like whatever your goal, my goals would have been, or anyone's goals are when they're 20 is different than when they're 30, 40, and 50. They just can't, it's unreasonable that your goals just stay the same the whole way.
Yeah. Do you remember, I think it's pronounced Alan Cosgrove, Alwyn. And he's still in our industry. We've met a bunch of times. And he was a cancer survivor. And he used to always say, 'cause we met him at one of Craig Ballantyne's events. And I'd be like, hey, man, how's it going? And he's like, only good days and great days. Right. And I'm like, it's a great outlook. That's a healthy outlook. Right. So, basically the whole after surviving cancer, it kind of puts stuff into perspective, and there's only good days and great days. And I really like that answer. And it kind of goes along the lines of what you're saying, is that health is really an outlook. Right. And then it's a word that's actually been hijacked to mean eating in a way that fits a value system, or having markers of bodily function that fit a current value for that person's goals, etc.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, there are some things you can tie back to generalities of certain things you could be headed in a direction that will greatly increase the risk that you'll shorten your life from how many years you could have. But again, it's all a personal choice if you want to put the effort in, if you bother to even take a look at those things in the first place. So the outlook really matters. Like, for example, another thing after all of the testing I did, and like I think I've mentioned it before, I have high LP(a). It's a lipoprotein, a specific lipoprotein that predisposes me to a higher risk of cancer, or a higher risk of cardiovascular disease. But I'm not going to stress and do everything and gear my whole life around just dealing with that particular issue. I have to put it in context. Of, okay, it's here. I got to deal with it. I think it's reasonable for me to put some effort into it. For me, I know that the Canadian medical system, and to some degree the American medical system, kind of take the viewpoint that, well, it's genetic. You can't do much about it anyways. So why even bother testing it? Why even know about it? Like, why put that undue stress on you? But that's their thought of what's best for me, not my thought of what's best for me. In my case, I did want to know about it. I found out about it. And now I'm going to do what is possible for me to do to minimize other risks and potentially even try to lower that exact biomarker. But that matters to me. So I would not let somebody else tell me how much that should matter to me. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I think it's difficult because you do want some markers. So we have our idea of the outlook, right? And then I was thinking for someone anywhere from an 18-year-old up to maybe not quite our mom's ages, but in that range. I mean, the easiest measurements for me, if I were to go for a couple of measurements you could do that don't involve a doctor's office, I think I would go grip strength and VO2 max. And VO2 max, I would do the Cooper test, where it's just how far can you run in 12 minutes, right? Because we know that cardiovascular disease is one of the sort of the main killers. And then grip strength is just a great one for how well you're aging. And then I keep toying, and I'll get your opinion on this. I want to say the third one is body fat levels, but in the end, I don't know if it is, because I just don't know if that's something for your average. Let's say you're 65 and you're just getting into health and fitness. It's a big undertaking, right? If I'm going to say that having lower levels of body fat, and you're like, buddy, I've got like 50 pounds to lose. And I'm always curious if it's the loss of body fat in that situation, or the work that went into losing the body fat in that situation that made the difference. But I kind of think I should put body fat there, but I do know I think the other two are easy measurements to take that would kind of give you an idea of what's going on without having to go to a doctor's or a lab.
All right.
So body fat, yes, no.
But as it relates
Tricky, right?
to this, yeah. I mean,
and not that it's not a marker of health, it's a bang for your buck and effort level, and whether or not we actually think the average person could get it down to a significant degree.
It could be a proxy for other measurements, but is it because someone gained fat and has to lose fat? Like some people don't have that as much of a capacity to store fat as someone else, but that doesn't necessarily mean they can't develop insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, and those, progressing to diabetes, which then is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So
Right.
Straight out of the gates, it's hard to say, because just because one person at the same height and is got way more body fat than the next person over, the distribution matters. How much visceral fat is there?
Visceral versus subcutaneous, where?
Yeah. They're conditioning otherwise. Are they really active? Are they doing a lot of exercise? Do they move around a lot? Are they managing their stress and their sleep and all other things?
Lots of pro athletes without six-pack abs, right?
Yeah. So you could be carrying around significantly more body fat than the next person over that's generally your height, your height, and you might not necessarily be any worse off than them per se, depending on the fat distribution.
Yeah, like obviously, I don't think that I'm any healthier if I drop from 10% down to 8%. I don't think that the average person at 18, 20% is going to get a lot healthier dropping to 14%. So I think it's more of a try to get into a healthy range, but sometimes that might be a massive undertaking for people that in that time could be better served in other spots.
Yeah, it's funny. You just said a healthy range. We can't even resist using the word
use
ourselves.
the word, but it doesn't.
Yeah, we use it all the time, and we're spending all this time just trying to define it. Yet we're constantly using it.
And so when we use it, I think it typically means the way we're using it. It does seem to imply a lowered risk of developing chronic diseases, but only based on the diseases that are caused by lifestyle.
Kind of.
So super selective, but I think that's how we generally use. I hope people understand it's not just John and I who can't define this. Other people might be saying they can, but they're lying to you.
Yeah, you almost did, like Brad. So honestly, before we started recording, Brad almost didn't want to do this because he knew we weren't being
infuriated.
He 100% knew there's no way we can define this, and that we're just going to go in circles like we are right now. So, I mean, what I'm trying to do is get to the point where you realize health is a personal definition.
It really is. Yeah.
And whenever you say, whenever you say health or what's healthy, that's not necessarily what anyone else, let me say it another way around. Whatever you're thinking the definition of health or healthy when you say it isn't the same definition as when somebody else says it.
So people are just leaving out the words to me. So when I go, John, I don't think that's healthy to me, right? Like it feels like I'm just imposing my defined version of health. I'm like, ooh, that person's pretty overweight. That's not healthy to me, right? Like it feels like I'm just putting my own personal takes on things, or inflecting on, I don't think I would feel healthy if I had that characteristic I'm describing. But it just seems like it's a weird value proposition we're throwing around that you can't avoid saying. Like if you work in health food, if you work in the health industry, telling people how to eat healthily so they can live a healthy lifestyle, and yet you can't define the bloody word.
Well, you can't define a word with the same word, right? And it's ironic you just said the actually correct way to view it is it's whatever's healthy to you. But the way it's usually used is someone will say what's healthy for the other person.
Oh, you're just judging other people on that's the fun part actually of all these terms, right? Is when I'm talking about eating healthier, I'm just talking about the fact I eat healthier than you, right? Like it's right. It's a comparative, and so it's a value thing that makes me feel like I'm doing a bit better than someone else. I'm just a bit healthier than that person. I eat super healthy. I live a super healthy lifestyle. And you're like, well, not really, man. Like it depending on how you define it. But I don't think the fact that you run 50K a day is actually healthy. It kind of scares me, right? Like when I think you're actually too lean. So your definition of healthy there is scary to me, right? Or maybe do you remember when we were like really into bodybuilding, and I like my grandfather would be like, "That's not healthy." All right, and he was a surgeon, so to him, the amount of muscle mass you and I were carrying around was alarming. Those, I think, his exact words, and asinine, I think, was the other word he used to describe it. But so it's so value based and undefinable and based on a person's opinion of someone else's current lifestyle choices.
Right. So what's the actionable step here? What do you even do with this? So
You
I
got to
think
ignore other people's opinions on what you do or do not do as being healthy. I mean, take it into consideration because they might be right. Understand there is a highly personal component to it outside of the well-known markers of disease risk, not health, but disease risk. And I like your thought was end of day, is there something prohibiting you from living your best days? And if there is, address that. But in that would be the healthiest thing you could do. Don't ignore the markers that medicine has spent centuries developing for us. But at the same time, I don't know if obsessing about all 180, however there are, is the best use of your time, especially if all you're doing is spending that time trying to buy yourself more time later in life so you can worry about how much more time you have, type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's a personal definition. Um, there is something to learn from science and medicine and where we've got to so far. So obviously, I wouldn't ignore practitioners and experts, but you have to take it in context of how it fits for you in your life and your whatever your goal is, and whatever action you choose to take based on that information. There's likely going to be a trade-off. You're likely
Always,
going to have to give up some amount of something to gain something else. You kind of can't just have it all, as it were. And the other thing to consider, it's reasonable that your goal or your definition of this for yourself changes over time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. So depending on where you're listening or watching John and I, love to hear your definition of health. And then if you're commenting on other people's definition, rule number one, just don't be a jerk about it. But it'd be interesting to see how other people take this, especially if you don't live in North America, because obviously we're biased by John's in the States, I'm in Canada right now. So we sort of that North American bias. But if you're anywhere outside of North America, we'd love to hear how you tackle this problem. But again, if other people leave comments, don't be jerks about your opinion on their ideas.
Mm-hmm. Should we give our trade-offs, like the choices we've made?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So one major one I've made is money. I'll actually trade some amount of money to learn a bit more about my body. And now I could totally be biased because of what I've just discovered and how I went through that process. I'm not saying anyone else should do this, but for me at this moment in my life, that was worth it to me. And I'm still pursuing some of those. I'm trading off some money to learn a bit more.
Right.
I've already started to taper down with that. I've already felt like I've sort of hit max sort of measurements. Like I've done a lot of blood work that I never would have thought I would be doing 2 years ago. Did various scans I never thought I would have been doing. And I've tapered down to a few that I think matter for my short and intermediate term goals for now, as far as how I want to like interact with, my environment and how I'm treating my body. So that's a trade-off. A trade-off is like that money could have been spent doing other things, but right now I'm spending more than I ever thought I would have spent on independently testing things that aren't just kind of handled through health insurance. Like I'm kind of going out of my way to do this. So that's a trade-off. Like money is probably the number one. If money was limitless for everyone and you had a concierge team who just showed up and just while you were having breakfast, don't worry, we got all this. We're going to map it all out for you. It's not even a consideration, but that's not insignificant when you have to put money online just to find something out. So, that was a trade-off I've made. Another trade-off is some amount of time. Like I do dedicate more time now to the gym than I did years and years ago, and I think I could get more out of it then. And now I've recognized that to get my body to a condition that I like, it just takes me longer. I have to put more time in with cardio. I have to be a lot more deliberate with my warm up and getting through a full routine in the gym. I just can't be as brief. I get the risk of injury goes up too high, and I constantly get injured if I'm too short in the gym. So,
Gotcha.
my two major trade-offs I'd say right now are money and time. I'm trading a fair bit of time to get where I want to physically, and I'm trading what was a fair bit of money, but tapering down to learn a bit more about my body because of my recent, I guess you could call, scare. I'm in a state of really needing to learn a bit more before I'm comfortable setting all that testing aside and just sort of getting into a routine without the testing.
Okay. Yeah. No, those are fair compromises. For me, it's my curiosity is still my biggest problem. So I like the idea of being part of the control group as best I can, to see what the long-term differences are. So we'll get into this in a whole other podcast, but I like a large portion of the guys in our industry are on testosterone replacement therapy, right? And then a large portion of both the guys and girls in our industry are on various forms of these new weight loss drugs, whether it's Ozempic, et cetera. And then there's a lot of dabbling in other things going on as well. Not necessarily surgeries, but medical procedures and injections and whatnot to try to preserve life, to look younger, et cetera. So I'm kind of curious if I just stick as long as I can until it's actually, a doctor being like, dude, you got to deal with this, right? How far does my current lifestyle take me before I definitely have to intervene? So it's kind of an which is weird because I know that the best course of action is preventative, right? But I think it'd be interesting to see, just for interest's sake, like what is the difference in 5-10 years, especially in our industry. So knowing that people you can easily look up on Instagram who've been on Instagram since they were, early 20s and now they're in their late 40s, some of them pushing 50. And okay, in another 10-15 years, where are we all? And I think that's super interesting. It's a bit of a compromise. And of course, if there's actually a health issue, I'm not avoiding it by any means, but I just think it would be interesting to have some form of control group as we go forward, at least in our little niche that we can compare to.
Mm-hmm. So the trade-off for you is you're actively avoiding multiple interventions you could take.
Yeah, like I could easily be on Ozempic, could be on TRT. I'm sure I could find, and then maybe some growth hormone analogs. Metformin is something everybody's taking, was a diabetes drug that they're taking for longevity purposes. Right. And I could get access to almost all of that without a problem. But I'm just like, or I couldn't. And I could just kind of ride along with the idea that at my checkups, I'm healthy. Right. And then go until there's a marker I have to address. I'm not going to preemptively address things. So this doesn't mean if I go to the doctors and they're like, well, dude, your cholesterol's messed up, I'll deal with it, right? But if they're like, yeah, everything's within good ranges, even though like optimum might be here, I might be here, I'm just going to kind of roll with that and just see where that gets me. Just as a comparator, just to see where we all end up, right? And then, if I get my test measured and the doc's like, dude, you got to address this, then I'll consider it. But I'm not going to preemptively be like, I know it's good for my age, but I want to be 23-year-old Brad Pilon test levels again or something like that, right? Because for me, my levels are still good. They might not be the world's best, but for pushing 47, they're still good. So I figure I'll just wait until there's actually like a very clear medical reason. And then at that time, do some quick comparisons. Where did I end up? I mean, the beauty of the online world is you can find pictures of me online at, you and I probably late 20s by the time we started getting pictures online.
Something right around 30, maybe.
Yeah. So, it'd be fun in a couple of years to try to recreate those pictures and see where we're at, right? Because day to day, we still think we look like we're 20, even though we probably don't. But It'd be fun to recreate the pics and be like, how far did we get? Like, how well were we able to maintain that if we wanted to? And it'd be, be kind of an interesting comparator, and then hopefully get other people in our industry to do the same thing, and just all of us compare. That's a look thing, but I think we'd also be able to openly talk about our health by then, hopefully.
Right. Right. So my trade-offs were time and money. Brad's trade-offs were potential benefits he's missing out on by just not using the myriad of things he does have access to and could implement, but he's fine with just leaving whatever benefit he could get on, like just leave it on the table.
And it'd be interesting because I mean, John and I know a lot of people that you guys might know on podcasts or follow on Instagram, and we do know a number of them have health issues they're not discussing because having a health issue, I'm still using that term, having some sort of disease that they're dealing with, etc., might hurt their brand of health. So what I'm hoping is that in another 10, 15 years, when we're, all mid to late 60s, type of thing, and we're openly talking about this, we can kind of look back and be like, okay, what were we actually dealing with? And whose lifestyles did the best at preventing what they could prevent, knowing kind of like John's cancer, a lot of these things are genetic and not lifestyle based. So there's no way around it, but see how many of us had actual lifestyle issues that we ended up dealing with. So be a very open and fun conversation in about a decade, assuming we're all still here and the internet still exists, that kind of thing.
Yep. All right. So I think that's a good place to leave it for today. So we're trying to define health, and the best
it's impossible.
Yes, it's impossible. And it's a personal definition. So whatever your definition of health is for yourself, that's going to be your personal definition. And you've got to understand that in order to move towards it, you're invariably going to have to make some kind of trade-off along the way.
Yes.
All right. So for Brad Pilon, I'm John Barber, and that's your Phi Life Podcast.